What is up guys, this is Mr. Ninja Boy, and today I'm going to start a new series guiding you guys through Photoshop, starting from the very basics and essential to eventually getting into the more advanced stuff in graphic design. My goal here is to maintain simplicity in this series and to make it possible for literally anyone to learn to use Photoshop, even if you've just started and are already confused just looking at the interface. Don't worry, I can understand. It may be daunting the first time you open Photoshop with all these options. In fact, it can be intimidating at first starting with any new program. But my goal here is to show you guys how simple yet powerful Photoshop really is. The sky is truly the limit with what you can do with it. If you guys don't know, this channel isn't only focused on gaming. In fact, I've started it with tutorials on game development. By the way, you can check that on the channel if you want to. But I've always really enjoyed teaching you guys my tips and tricks and passing on my knowledge I got in certain programs to newcomers and to people looking to improve. So I'm quite excited to start the series. Later on, we're going to be doing some really exciting stuff like making thumbnails, making logos, complex graphic art, and much more. But in this first tutorial, we're just going to focus on the very basics of Photoshop. This is the perfect guide for someone who's just begun using Photoshop. So like any program, the best way to familiarize yourself to it at first would be to get a hang of the interface and all its features. So we're going to do just that. Then as we dive deeper into this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys a collection of simple yet essential features that you must learn while first starting. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so let's get started with learning the interface. Now, to make sure that we're all on the same page with the interface itself, with all its features, all the windows, everything, let's go to Window and then Workspace, and then make sure you're checked on Essentials Default, which is basically going to ensure that we have all the same features and everything. Alright, so now let's proceed and make our first file, our first project you can call it. So let's go to New, File, and then New. And then this is basically the window where we're going to do all the settings for our project. So first of all, we can name the project whatever we want. I'm just going to name it example for the tutorial's sake. And then for the width and height, you can later on, you can do whatever you want, mattering on what sort of project you want. Let's say you want to do like a Twitter header or something, and then there's certain like dimensions you want to do, then you choose that. But for now, we're going to do it a standard 1920 by 1080 dimension for this project, 1080, and then make sure you're always selected on pixels. Okay, this is important. So for the width and height, you want to be on the same units essentially, but we're going to be working with pixels because it's the easiest. I mean, I don't really work with centimeters or millimeters, inches on the computer. It just doesn't make sense for me, but I mean, I guess it matters on what you're doing. But for me, pixels, for now, we're going to work with pixels for both width and height. And yeah, I was going to say for me, it's just the easiest because, you know, everything is in pixels on the computer. So, yeah, so just select everything here. It doesn't really matter what you do for the bit depth. I'm just gonna go with 16-bit, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's press continue, or okay, and then we continue to this screen, which gives us by default we're just gonna have a blank white square. So this is, as you guys can see, right here to the right, this is basically like the layers tab. This shows us all the layers, all the elements, everything that is included in the project. So all we have now, this is basically like a very blank project. All we have is this background white box sort of thing. So to first get started, and we're just gonna unlock this layer because by default when you make a new project, the first layer is locked. So we don't really have a lot of freedom to like move it around and stuff. So what we're gonna do is actually double click on this locked icon, or this lock icon, and then when we do that, as you guys can see, we have this like layer option. So let's name it background. So let's name it background, and then we can keep the color, we can do it none, and then it'll basically be the default color, or we can choose whatever you want, and that'll essentially just make the color of the not essentially the box, but that's like the color here. Let me do that. And let's select a color. This is actually very good for organizing, and we're gonna go over that later. So let's, as you guys can see, the red color that we selected is sort of kind of like marks it with that little red color. So later on, while you're working, you can always assign layers different colors, and with that, you can kind of organize your project. But that's not very important for now. We're just gonna learn the interface for now. So as you guys can see, we have a white background here. So the first thing we're actually going to do is learn the move tool. So the first tool that we are actually offered in this column to the left is this move tool. So we're going to select, make sure that you go to the right in this layers tab and select our one and only layer in this project. And then we're going to select the move tool. And then we can, as you guys can see, we can move the box around. And what you see in this background, if you see this like sort of checkered background, that basically means it's transparent. Because if you render out this picture right now, it's basically going to be transparent. So all you'd see is this box and then nothing else. This background is transparent. So what we're going to actually do is undo that. So you can undo move, and then let's say you do a couple actions. The best way to undo stuff is to actually go Control Alt Z, because that is the ultimately, like, you can only undo once. See, as you guys can see, I undid all the way back to creating the background. So let's actually read step forward. So if I do Control Z, wait, hold on, step forward, and let's add like just for the tutorial's sake, let's just do like scribbles, something like that. So let's say I did Control Z once, and then I did it again. As you guys can see, it just redid that. So the way we go step backwards, if you want to keep on undoing more than once, is Control Alt Z, or we can go edit and then step backward. That's a very important tool you guys must know in the future. Anyways, so now let's add a shape to this project. As you guys can see, that is like, we learned like to use the move tool, which is, you know, it's quite straightforward. And then we're gonna learn to do more stuff like rotating. So the first thing we're actually gonna do now to learn that is actually go down to this tool, right? As you guys can see, it's like a little squiggly sort of shape. So we're gonna right click on that and actually select the rectangle tool. So as you guys can see, we kind of have this little crosshair sort of thing. So we're gonna select and drag, and we're gonna make a rectangle by doing that. So we did make a rectangle, but as you guys can see, it's sort of like a white rectangle, so it's kind of blending in the background. All you guys can see is like the black outline around it, kind of indicating that we're selected on it. So if we deselect that, as you guys can see, we can't really see the rectangle. So we're gonna assign a color to it, or a fill color. So we're just gonna go to the fill option, as you guys can see up here. Select that, and we can choose any color for the rectangle. Since the background is white, anything that isn't white it's gonna show. So let's just make this like a dark gray color, I guess. That works. So now if we want to move the rectangle in the middle, of course, we can do that by just clicking, dragging. And if you guys want to move any object in a sort of linear fashion, where you don't really, if you want to just like assign like a certain, let's say we want to move it like horizontally, so we can just like put it there, and then if you just hold down shift and then move it, it sort of locks to the position where it was. If let's say we're moving horizontally now, we can't move it left and right, we can just move it horizontally because it's locked. And then let's say we want to move it left and right, there. So that's the way you, and then let's say we like go shift, as you guys can see, it does that. So we can also do that diagonally, of course. So that's the way you guys can move things linearly, where it kind of just locks onto the axis it's on. So now let's say we wanted to rotate this rectangle. We can go Control T, and that is basically just basically the shortcut for the transform. And let's say we wanted to rotate this rectangle. We can guide our mouse to the sort of corner of the box, where we kind of see this little arrow pointing downward and then to the left. And once we see that, we can click and drag to how we want to rotate this. So let's say we want to rotate it like that or like that. And you can if you guys also can see like this angle sort of thing up here, we can do that numerically. We can we don't necessarily need to do it visually here, but we can also input numbers and do whatever you want with the angles. Same with the width and height, all the dimensions. So let's say we wanted to reset that to 0. Just to you know, have it like how it was before we did any of the edits. Or another way you guys can do that, let's say you scaled it, you did a bunch of stuff to the object, but you didn't you want to just revert it to how it was before. Before you went to Control T, you guys can just click this sort of like undo icon, I guess. And as you guys can see, it kind of reverts it to what we did before the transform options. So now what we're actually going to do is, yeah, as you guys can see, you guys can scale it visually, as I said, or you can actually do it here. So let's say we want it twice as big as it is now. So we can go 200% by 200%. So it's basically 2 times bigger than it was. And then once we are happy with the edits we did, we can just click this check arrow and then, or the check icon. And then basically we've just applied all the changes we did to this object. All right, so now we're gonna actually, now that's basically like the very basics of the interface. And now we're actually gonna add some effects to this box, like a drop shadow, maybe an outer glow or something like that. And this is actually very simple to do. So we're just gonna navigate down to, oh yeah, make sure you're selected on the certain layer. So if you're selected on this, it kind of shows like these little square icons where you can obviously do the changes, and then you can do all the stuff that we learned. So I'm just gonna revert back to how it was. But make sure you're selected on the rectangle on top. And this is all very important to actually know, like the, it's kind of like a hierarchy. So let's say we wanted to have this background on top of this, where we wouldn't be able to see this. We'd basically just have to drag that on top. So any layer that is on top is shown on top of, it's basically like a layering system. It's very straightforward. So yeah, always make sure that the smaller layers, backgrounds are always on the bottom of everything. That's basically the way you want to think about it. So yeah, make sure this layer is on top of the background. And then let's say we want to add, like I said, effects. So we click on the rectangle and go down to this effect icon, click on that, and then go blending options. So now this is where we have a bunch of options where we can mess around with. So the first thing I'd like to do is to drop shadow. So have a little shadow behind this box. So we go down to this option and click on drop shadow. So as you guys can see, we have a little shadow behind this box, but we can make it more drastic, make it bigger. So we can like make it bigger by increasing the size and then the spread. The spread essentially makes it more like condensed, I want to say, but I'm not sure if that's the right word to use. But so basically, yeah, we can increase it using the spread and size. Size just makes the shadow spread a bit more. So let's make this size a bit smaller. So as you guys can see, we have a little shadow behind it, and that looks pretty nice. And what else can we do for the effects? We can add a stroke, and the stroke is basically like a little outline that goes around any object. So the stroke, we can change the color. Let's make it red, for example, and then we can press OK. And we can also increase the size of the stroke by clicking and dragging, or also like inputting your own number. So let's say we want it 10 pixels. And as you guys can see, that's the 10 pixel stroke that we have around this rectangle now. And what else can we do? We can do a bevel and emboss. As you guys can see, it adds like a little nice 3D sort of embossed bevel sort of effect. And we can increase the depth, and by doing so, it gives that illusion even more. And then we can obviously increase the size, and that doesn't look very good. Let's make it, yeah, that looks good. Alright, what else can we do? We can also add a pattern overlay, and then you can mess with this, add your own patterns and stuff, but these are the default patterns that come with Photoshop. So this is a nice little texture sort of thing. That's a cool texture, but we can't really see it since the background is like white. So yeah, those are basically like textures you can add. So we're not going to really add anything for now. We're just going to keep it like that. Or actually, let's just add that texture. That looks pretty cool. And what else can we do? We can do an outer glow. So outer glow is basically, let's add a different color. Let's make it red, so it'll go nicely with the border, so, or the stroke. So the outer glow is essentially just like a drop shadow sort of thing. It's very similar to the shadow, but it basically it's just like a little glow of a certain color that you can choose, or that basically outlines around the object. You can also do inner glow that basically does the same effect, but towards the inside of the object, instead of it having it on the outside of it. So we can also do color overlay. This is where we can, if it's not a shape and we can't edit the fill, we can actually do it here manually. So we can go to color overlay and then we can change the color, do it to whatever color we want. Choose whatever color we want, and yeah, we're not going to do that now, so we're going to just uncheck that. Satin basically just makes it a little darker. That can be a cool effect. And also, yeah, as inner glow, inner shadow. The shadow is inner shadow is basically like a drop shadow, but it makes it like in the inside of it. Same as inner glow in comparison to outer glow, so the same sort of idea. And a gradient overlay. This is a cool feature that we can take a look at. So gradient overlays, essentially it kind of mixes colors into instead of having one solid color. So as you guys can see, this is a mixture of like a black and a gray / whitish color, and there's a couple presets which we can choose. There's like a rainbow, and there's like striped black, there's cool colors. So these are only the presets, but you guys can edit them. So let's say we wanted that, and then we can edit it. So we can change the colors here, so we can actually select that, and then we can select different colors. So let's say we wanted the middle color like green, we can have it red, and yeah, so you can edit it to whatever you basically want. So there, let's say we're happy with that, and then that's the gradient overlay. So it's basically like a mixture of colors. That's the best way to think about it, I guess. So yeah, let's just keep it with that texture. And so yeah, those are basically like the effects, the essential effects. They're so easy to to use, and it's very simple, and to add everything, and drop shadow, all the strokes, everything. They're very simple, yet they're used in like in quite complex graphics. I always use them. These are very basic, and they work really well, so they're awesome. So now we're actually gonna import an image from the internet that I downloaded and edit that. So the way we're gonna do this is actually gonna go to File, and then we're gonna go to Place. So there's two ways we can do this. We can go to File, Place, and then find the image that we downloaded. So this is an image of the McLaren P1. Or let's say we undid that, and then we can go to File, Open. And then we can open that, and then that actually opens it to the exact dimensions of the image itself. And that's the best way to do it if you want to edit a certain image, instead of doing it instead of placing it inside a project. But let's say you have a project where you want to mix pictures in and add different pictures. You can go to File, Place, and then find the image and then put it in. But yeah, so we're gonna basically do some edits to this image. So the first thing we're going to do is actually duplicate this McLaren P1. So we're going to go to this tool right here, which is called the lasso tool. And as you guys can see down here, we have a little this thing that says 50%. It's basically how much it's zoomed to the original size. So let's go 100%. So this just means that we are looking at the exact resolution of this image. And the reason why we go 50% when editing the full project is so we can see the full project. Because if we go over 50%, we'd have to scroll around to be able to see everything. But for the lasso tool, it's very important to see every little detail. So we're gonna go 100%. And if you guys have a smaller image that you want to edit, then you'd want to go even bigger. But essentially for this, we're just gonna go 100%. And once we're zoomed in, we're just gonna have a nice shot of the McLaren. So basically just zoom into a point where the biggest part of the image is the focus where you want to duplicate. So now we're just gonna outline this McLaren P1 having selected this lasso tool. So we're gonna outline it starting from here, and we're gonna do a bit of a sloppy job here. It's not very important to be very precise. But all you got to do is just click and drag with your left mouse button tool, and just select all the outer part of the image that you so yeah, I'll leave this image in the description down below that you guys can edit the same exact thing that I'm doing. But if you guys want to do a different image, just find one on the internet, anything really. It doesn't really have to be a car, but for this tutorial, it's simple. A car, this image is actually very good for like the duplicating and everything that we're gonna do. So I'm just selecting it with this lasso tool. It doesn't really have to be very precise. If I was gonna do this very precise, I'd probably go like 600% on the zoom, and then just do like very pixel by pixel, making it really, really sharp. But anyways, now that we've done that, we can zoom back out to look at the full image and go 50%. And as you guys can see there, we've selected that. Now, before we duplicate it, let's do the same thing with this background and double click on this lock icon. So once we do that, we can basically name the layer to whatever we want. So let's name it McLaren. And then once we've named it McLaren, just press enter or click OK. And then as you guys can see there, we've got the image unlocked. And the next thing to do is to make sure that you selected on that layer. And then we're going to go Control C or Command C. It matters if you're on Mac or PC. It doesn't really matter, but yeah. So just Control C and then Control V. So once we've done that, as you guys can see, now we have 2 layers. And if we hide this layer, we can hide layers by clicking on this little eye icon, which indicates layer visibility, as it says there. So we click on that. As you guys can see, we have just an outline of the McLaren itself, and then the background is just transparent. As I told you guys before, this checker sort of thing indicates that the background is transparent. So let's just bring the background back. And now, as you guys can see, we have this McLaren here. So we can click and using the move tool that I showed you guys earlier, we can click and drag and move it to wherever we want on this project. Let's say we want this McLaren facing this McLaren, so sort of switching the direction it's going. So we can go Control T, which is short for transform, the shortcut, and we can go to height and just add a little minus symbol. Or no, that makes it upside down. Let's do it on the width actually. So let's go minus 100%. It's still maintaining the same dimensions. However, it's negative on the width, making it going the other direction. So we can also do that by clicking and dragging like that. But the easiest way to maintain the proportions is to just do it like that. So once we choose a spot where we want the McLaren, we can press OK, or we can even do the rotation like I showed you guys earlier, and that looks pretty cool. Just 2 little McLarens facing each other off. So what are we gonna do now? We can do some effects. Let's say like a drop shadow, and that looks all right. Let's make it a little bigger. We can do outer glow. That looks cool. And then we can increase the size. As you guys can see, that looks pretty cool. So yeah, I just showed you guys everything else. It's quite straightforward for the effect. But now what we're actually going to do is to actually make a adjustment layer. And basically we're going to mess around with the color correction, the exposure, everything to make this image look as nice as possible. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to go to layer and then new, we're going to go to layer, new adjustment layer. And then the first thing we're going to do is to add a brightness / contrast layer. So we're just going to click OK. You can name that whatever you want. You can even color code it just like I showed you guys earlier to for better organization, but we're just going to leave that alone for now. So as you guys can see, this is the first adjustment layer. Now, adjustment layers basically are just like editing layers. They're not visible. They're not necessarily like solid items, or objects in the scene or in the in the project in all the elements. But they're basically just to adjust the visual aspect of this project. So we're going to go to contrast. We're actually going to increase the contrast. As you guys can see, if we decrease the contrast, it looks a lot more like washed up, or if we increase it, it looks a lot more like vivid. So we're going to make it, let's say 40 looks good. 40. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then we can increase the brightness a little, decrease it. Ooh, that looks pretty nice. If we decrease the brightness a bit there, too much brightness doesn't look very good in my opinion. Let's go actually -7. I thought I'd actually go more brightness, but a little lower brightness looks a lot better. So now that's how it looked before the first adjustment layer, and then after, that's how it looks. So as you guys can see, it already looks pretty cool, just like that. So we're gonna add another adjustment layer by going layer, new adjustment layer, and then we're gonna go to levels. Now we're just going to click OK, just like everything else. And then levels, we can, there's a lot of presets, so you can mess with that yourself here, but we're gonna actually select a preset on the level, so we can click darker. Ooh, that looks really cool. And then there's increased contrast, and you know, so this is basically like a easy way to make your project look a certain way. So let's just select let's see increase contrast. That's a little too much. Contrast 1, darker, that's a little too dark. Midtones brighter, midtones darker. I think that looks pretty damn cool. And now since it's quite dark, we can actually go back to this and double click on that icon and increase the brightness a bit, because it is quite dark. All right, that looks pretty cool now. So next thing we're gonna add is actually a let's see, a layer, and then new adjustment layer. We can add a let's see, exposure. And then once we add exposure, you can mess around with that. We're actually gonna decrease the exposure a bit, and then the offset, you can mess around with that, and then we're actually going to increase that a bit just to bring out the color, the dark colors a bit. And then the gamma correction, you can mess around with that as well. That is starting to look really cool. So that is how the project, or like, it's initially looked, and then after all these correction layers, this is how it's looking right now. So let's add one more just for the sake of, you know, showing you guys how all this works. It's all the same, you know, it's all the same concept. You just have to tweak it and then play with all these settings, everything, just to get the perfect look of the project that you want. So let's go to layer, new adjustment layer, and then let's add a, let's see, color lookup. Now color lookups are basically like a correction color layer, and these are quite tricky to work with because you can basically load up files that are called LUT files, and I might actually do that later in like different tutorials and show you guys how to make those LUT different color color correction files. So for now, we're gonna go with something that is default. Ooh, that looks pretty cool. So we're gonna go with, let's see, turquoise sepia. But as you guys can see, these are basically like filters that make your project look a certain way. Let's see, that looks cool. So if we're happy with that, we can just leave that, and then yeah. So that's basically like the you know, all the adjustment layers. Alright, so let's say I wanted to add some text now to this project. It's actually really straightforward. In Photoshop, there's this icon with a T on it, one of the tools, and that actually allows us to add text. So let's actually select that, and then anywhere on the project that we want to actually add the text box, or the text itself, we can just click. So let's say we wanted to add a title here at the top. So we can just click there and type something. So I'm just going to say example, since this is a tutorial. So as you can see, we just typed text there, but it's not visible because it's like half cut off, because you know, it's not positioned correctly. So if we just move like anywhere out of the actual text box itself, we can still see the move position before we click the check mark for the transform tool. So there, as you can see, it says example, but it actually is quite big, this text. So let's make it a bit smaller. Let's go to let's say you can change the font and everything from here. Let's say we wanted to change the font, so let's select something else, and that's not a really nice font. There we go. That's a pretty good font. And then we also need to tone down the actual font size. So here there's like a drop down menu that only goes to 72 point, but that's obviously way too small. So we can input our own number here to make the text a lot bigger. So let's say 500. Yeah, that's good. So that's our example text, as you can see there. So that looks pretty cool. And then we can also mess around with some of the settings for the actual text itself, like effects. So we can go to FX and then blending options. And then from here we can go to, let's say, overlay blend mode. And then blend mode is basically what it does. It's like there's different blend modes that do different things. Like difference is basically like it does opposite colors, and then you can do exclusion, which is essentially does the same thing, darken, doesn't really work there, but you guys can basically just mess around with that in different settings, different backgrounds. There's different effects that work better than others. So for this one, we're actually going to go difference. That actually looks really cool. And then if we just move around, you guys can see it kind of does like an X-ray sort of filter on the background itself, on what it's on what it's on. So that looks really cool. You can still see the clouds and everything on the actual background. It's basically just the like polar opposite of what the colors are. So yeah, it's really simple to add text in Photoshop. You can also do other effects like drop shadow, everything else that we learned in the effects panel. Okay, so now let's say I wanted to erase a part of the McLaren. So we can actually use the eraser tool, which is also very straightforward to use. So there's this little tool, like this little eraser icon that we can select here. Once we selected that, we're going to go up to here and actually select the size. So let's go around 100 pixels. And then we're going to actually decrease, if you have a hardness on like 50% by default, just decrease it down to, let's say, we're just going to go to 0% for now, actually. And then I'll show you guys the difference when you actually increase the hardness of the eraser. So now we're going to select the duplicated McLaren layer, and then we're going to start erasing. So as you guys can see, you can erase parts of this layer using this simple eraser tool. And now let's say we go step backward, and then we go to the hardness and we increase it to 100% just to show you guys the complete opposite. So let's select the McLaren layer again, and then we can actually just erase it directly. And as you guys can see, it's a lot different. It's a lot like crisper. And then I can show you guys a side by side by decreasing the hardness and then going back. And as you guys can see here, it's a lot softer, like the way it erases, and there it's just crisp. It's a crisp line. So that's essentially the difference between and then you can also select different like brushes for the eraser. So that's like sort of like a nice little pen sort of brush, or like a paintbrush sort of, not a pen, a paintbrush sort of style to the eraser. So you can do lots of cool styles with that actually. But let's just go Control-Alt-Z for step backward, and just go back to where it was. So yeah, that's basically the eraser tool. And I wanted to show you guys one more thing before I end this first essentials sort of like basics tutorial. Is I'm going to show you guys the pen tool. Now the pen tool is something that is sort of like how you make logos, how you make like objects, how you make shapes and stuff in Photoshop. And this is a very essential tool that you must learn. So let's make another new project, a blank project. So let's go 1920 by 1080, or we can actually just go back to this one. Actually, forget that. So let's just delete that, and then we have the white background here. Or we don't really have to delete it. We can just click on the visibility icon and just hide it. So let's make a shape. So let's say we wanted to make a letter Z. So we can start by selecting a point here, and then let's say we wanted to make another point here. So a letter Z looks something like that, right? But that's not necessarily straight. So we go Control-Alt-Z for step backward, and then we can keep this anchor point here. However, when we select the second point, we can hold Shift down, which basically makes it straight. See, as you guys can see, that's a perfect straight line. Now to do it diagonally, we can also do the Shift tool. You use the Shift tool, and then if we want to move this, we can select Control and then Shift, or sorry, not Shift, just Control, and then once you've dragged it to where you want, we can click Shift, and as you guys can see there, it's straight. So let's put it right there. That looks good. And then we can also select the third point by clicking Shift, and right there. So now we're gonna actually make it like 3-dimensional, and there we go. We can press Control to edit that one point, and then let's bring it up to here, click Shift to make it straight, and then add another point by clicking shift to make it straight, of course, and then finishing this object. Once you're finished and then you want to like close the object, you guys can see that little circle icon beside like the pen tool, and then once you click that, it basically makes it a shape, and then we can right click, create a let's define a custom shape actually, and let's name it Z. So, and then we can click enter, and so let's actually go to this rectangle icon and then select custom shape tool. And then from here, there's a little drop down menu. We can select all the custom shapes that we have, and the most recent ones are on the bottom. So your icon that you probably just made is on the bottom, and we can click anywhere on the screen and then have, this is like the default width and height, I guess. So make sure you're always on preserve proportions if you want it to look exactly how you made it, and then you can adjust the height and width, but I'm just gonna leave it like that for now. So this is the shape that we have, and as you guys can see, you can't really see it. It's probably because it's white. So we're gonna go to the effects, and then we're gonna go to color overlay, and then yeah, we can change the color to whatever you want. Let's just make it black, I guess, because it's white in the background. It's easy to see, and then we can do everything else like that I taught you guys, like outer glow. Let's make it I don't know, red. And size, spread, let's actually just make the background transparent. So yeah, as you guys can see there, that's the outer glow right there. So yeah, that's basically all I wanted to show you guys in this essentials tutorial. I feel as though I covered everything that is very essential to learn when you first start using Photoshop, from the interface to the the essential tools that you must learn. And from there, it's not very hard. Like, everything else is really straightforward, just like this. It's basically just more detailed, has more features, there's more features to cover for sure. And that's definitely why I want to continue this series. And yeah, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this essentials tutorial for Photoshop. And yeah, I'll definitely be continuing this, and stay tuned. And if you're new around here, make sure you subscribe, and because I will definitely be doing of course a lot more tutorials, get notified when I do upload. And yeah, if you guys enjoy this, I'd love to hear you guys' feedback, what you guys would like to see in the next tutorial. And yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. As I said, this has been Mr. Ninja Boy, and I will see you guys in the next one.